is a very full circle moment for me because I've been coming to Eagle Council since I was a kid, and I know so many of you in this room since I was, a little kid. So I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate you allowing me to come and talk about this topic. I have been on the FBI's Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force for the last 2 years since coming back from a tour overseas. And I, like you, many of you in this room, I would imagine, did not know a lot about the technologies that we're going to be talking about until I started to see some of the crimes that were happening using these platforms, and then realized that I was going to have to start getting a little bit smarter about what these technologies were capable of. And it becomes kind of a rabbit hole where you realize once you learn about one, you have to start learning about all of them, because these technologies are being leveraged to exploit children in new ways, or at least access children in new ways. The exploitation, it turns out, is the same. A clicker for the slide. So this is what we're going to cover today. First of all, what is the metaverse? Show of hands, has anybody in here ever actually used virtual reality goggles to get into the metaverse? That's actually more people than I thought. So that's pretty good, and there were about 7 of you. So also we're going to talk about how is it being leveraged to exploit children and vulnerable individuals. How can we mitigate the threat posed by the metaverse? And then the developing technologies and the future of exploitation we're going to talk about tonight in an evening breakout session, because we just don't have the time today to go into that. But it's about more than just the metaverse. There are so many technologies that are either in their nascent stages now or that are coming down the pike that are also going to be used to do this same thing. So we're going to talk about that as well. So what is the metaverse? The term metaverse actually comes from a novel called Snow Crash that was written by Neal Stephenson in 1992. And all it really is or at least as it's portrayed in this book, is a single digital copy of the real world where people can live, work, play, interact, have jobs, and exist. So it's basically putting on a pair of virtual reality goggles and being able to live your life the same way that you live it out here. If you've ever seen the movie Ready Player One, it's very similar to that, where you are in a kind of a post-apocalyptic world, and to escape the kind of terrible reality around you, you go into the metaverse to live a different life. But we don't have a single digital copy of the world currently, because there are technical and commercial limitations. For example, there are some technical limitations so far. We can't actually make this a reality yet, but there are a lot of commercial limitations as well, because it would require a massive amount of commercial cooperation to make this happen. For example, if I buy, a crossbow in World of Warcraft, this kind of cooperation would require that Minecraft let me take that same crossbow into their platform as well. Well, there's no incentive for Minecraft to let me do that, because it means that I'm not buying the crossbow from them, right? So there's not enough incentive right now for the commercial cooperation to create this single digital copy of the world. So what we actually have right now are metaverses, right? Multiple metaverses where you can go in and out of what is basically an app store. So when you put on the goggles, just like you see on your phone, you have an app store, and you can choose what platforms you want to engage with. We also have proto-metaverses. So these are whole worlds that you can engage with, but they're not necessarily virtual reality. So a good example of that is Roblox. You might have kids or grandkids who play this game, but it's very popular. There are millions of users of Roblox around the world right now. And Roblox is considered a proto-metaverse. But these are just commercial app platforms that are accessed through virtual reality goggles. So I'm going to talk a lot today about the Oculus or the Quest goggles. Those are the Meta virtual reality goggles. I usually defer or default to talking about that platform because they have the significant market share. They have about 82% of the market share right now, but there are other goggles. Apple just released their goggles, the Vision Pro. Microsoft has a set of goggles. There are a lot of different goggles out there, but because Meta, which is Zuckerberg's company, right, Facebook, Instagram, they own such a large portion of the market share. The majority of people that you know who interact with this platform are doing it through Meta. So these are what the goggles look like, right? You've got the Oculus, which is up there in the corner, the Vision Pro, which was just released. But this is basically what it's going to look like. So when we talk about the metaverse, essentially what we're talking about is Web3 technology. And this might be a term that you hear a lot in the news right now, Web3, right? But Web3 is essentially a host of different technologies that are enabling this platform. There are a lot of discussions amongst technologists about exactly which platforms or which technologies make up Web3. Certainly, it includes the blockchain, it includes non-fungible tokens, it includes AI. There are other things that people talk about, right? DAOs, things like that. We're not going to get into those technologies right now. See, I have a little asterisk up there. Anytime you see that, it means we're going to talk about that later tonight because we don't have the time to talk about it today. So if you want to learn more about it, we can certainly get into more detail tonight in the breakout session. But what is incredibly important here is decentralization. Decentralization is basically the foundational theory behind Web3. It is what motivates the people who are working on these technologies to bring about the future of these platforms. And it has a lot to do with kind of the problems that they see inherent in Web 2, which is where we are now. So Web 1, which is a text-based reality, right? When we first saw the internet, it was you would go in there, you would put something into a search engine, and it would bring up information that was largely text-based, right? You were reading about something you wanted to know about. Web 2, which is what we have now, was largely mobile-based. It's social media apps. It's what we have on our cell phones, and it also included user-generated content. It's where we, as the users, are putting content into the internet, right? We're putting our pictures on Facebook. We're saying how we feel today, right? User-generated content became much bigger in Web 2. And so we have a much more interactive internet. Web 3 is based on these technologies and is going to become even more interactive. And like I said, we'll talk more about that tonight. But what are people's general perceptions of the metaverse? This is usually what people think. This is what the metaverse does, right? It's for video games and it's for social media. And that is true. You can do those things in the metaverse. What a lot of people don't know are the other things that you can do in the metaverse. For example, it's for entertainment. Macklemore, who's a rapper, had an album release party where you could actually attend. And he did a concert, and it felt like you were there. You could also, through the International Space Station, have an experience with them where it felt like you were in space. It is also used for education through metaversities. There are universities all over the world, including the University of Maryland, Kansas, Morehouse College. Oxford is doing it, places all over the world where you can get full degrees sitting in a virtual classroom. You can turn to the right and to the left and see fellow students sitting next to you from all over the world, and it feels like you're really in that classroom and you're attending real classes. The real life applications and benefits of something like that are massive. I spent 3 years in East Africa where the majority of those kids are never going to have access to the kind of education that we have here. But with a pair of goggles and an internet connection, they can get a degree from Oxford. So there's amazing applications for this kind of technology, but there are some potential drawbacks as well. Work and productivity. Companies are adopting this with rapid speed. And in fact, the Apple goggles that just came out, that's what they're primarily targeting. They're not putting their goggles out at $400 a pop like Meta is. Theirs are about $3,000, and it's because they're going after a much different market. They're going after government contracts. They're going after education contracts, medical training. You can do full autopsies with these goggles on, using haptics and other technology that makes it feel like you're really cutting into a body. But Hilton Hotels, Farmers Insurance, Nestle, they're all using these goggles for training to make it feel like they've got, that you're in the same work environment, even though you've got employees all over the world. Additional features include a full web browser that can go into incognito mode, which means that if you have a kid who has a pair of goggles on, they can put the web browser into incognito mode, which means that there's no cache, there's no history. Nobody can tell where they went on the internet because you're doing it secretly in incognito mode. There's TV streaming. You can put all of your Netflix and your HBO Max and any other streaming services you have, you can watch on your face. There are online casinos where you can actually gamble. There are adult entertainment spaces, including strip clubs and sex clubs. There are 18+ spaces, just like on the internet, that only require one-click age verification, just like now on the internet, which just says, are you over 18? Yes, I am. And it's on your face. So, parental controls. We'll talk more about this tonight as well. Meta and other VR platforms do have parental controls. Those have evolved over time. When the Oculus came out, it didn't have any parental controls at all. It almost got banned in the UK because the Parliament claimed that it violated their children's code because they felt it was unsafe, because there were no ways to control what the kids were accessing while they were online. But all parental controls are only effective, A, if parents turn them on, right, and know how to use them, and only to the extent that the kids don't figure out how to defeat them. But if you go into Google and you Google how to defeat Oculus parental controls, the first thing that comes up is a Reddit with a whole bunch of kids having discussions about how to defeat the parental controls on the Oculus. Some are better than others, right? But it is possible. So, these controls can be very effective, but not always. So, what kind of crimes can we see in the metaverse? Well, there are two different types. There are virtual crimes and there are crimes in real life. So the virtual crimes include things like sexual assault against an avatar, hate speech, and harassment. There is virtually no ability to prosecute currently a crime that occurs in the metaverse because there are no laws to cover that. So if you are sexually assaulted in the metaverse, there is nothing that law enforcement can do to stop it. The only thing that can be done is the actual platform itself banning a user for violating the terms of service that you agreed to, that box that you click when you go into a platform that says, I agree to the following conditions for using this platform. But we'll talk about in a minute the real life psychological impacts that happen when you experience a crime in the metaverse. And we'll also talk about the difference between the laws and the terms of service. The crimes in real life that can happen as a result include child exploitation, CSAM or child sexual abuse material, sextortion, and kidnapping. So the indicators of virtual crimes, the things that we've seen in the metaverse that include the virtual crimes. The Center for Countering Digital Hate basically did a 12-hour study inside the app VR Chat in which they identified over 100 violations of the terms of service, right? So this is hate speech, this is harassment, this is sexual assaults, 100 in a 12-hour period. I have an Oculus, I use it for work, and I can tell you right now, the second that I walk into any space, into any platform, I am immediately going to be assaulted by a barrage of usually adult men with all kinds of sexually explicit language, of trying to get me to participate in virtual activities. It is just constant. A BBC researcher posing as a 13-year-old child has gone into the metaverse to do some research and has found that the same thing, that she's able to get into spaces intended for 18 and over adults, that she was able to get into strip clubs, get into overly sexualized environments. She was able to see avatars simulating sex acts in large groups and experienced grown men encouraging her to engage in virtual sex acts, despite knowing she was a minor. All crimes like this rely on, like whether or not it's a crime, relies on whether or not the person that you're interacting with knows that you are a minor. In these cases, they know that you're a minor. Additionally, according to the BBC, a UK-based safety campaigner spent months investigating metaverse platforms, including VR Chat, and spoke to minors who claimed that they were groomed on the platform and forced to participate in virtual sex. Because of the immersive nature of VR, the minors had to physically act out these acts, right? This is virtual reality. So anything that you do, this is why, for example, the exercise platforms work so well, right? You can go into an exercise room and participate in, an aerobics class, and it works really well because you have to do the aerobics, right? Well, it's the same thing if you're participating in something like this. And then Nina Jane Patel, a metaverse researcher, describes being gang raped in the metaverse within 60 seconds of entering a room. in the platform of Horizon Venues, which is Meta's native platform, and the assailants chased and assaulted her avatar, verbally assaulted her. And the thing that's really important here is that she has since experienced death and rape threats in real life for exposing and speaking out on her experience. So this is that moving into the real life realm because of her talking about what happened to her when she got inside the metaverse. So punishments for virtual crimes, and we can talk more about this tonight as well. Prosecution versus terms of service violations. These are not crimes in real life. There are no statutes that cover being assaulted in the metaverse. So the only thing that you can do is basically report somebody to the platform and say, hey, this person is engaging in lewd behavior, they're engaging in hate speech, they're engaging in the following violations. And if the platform wants to, they can ban that user. We've already seen platforms like Meta, for example, say, well, we can't police anything that's happening in VR chat. VR chat doesn't belong to us. That's a private company. And even though we host that app on our platform, it is device agnostic, which means if you have any other type of VR device, you can get into that app as well, right? So if you're coming in through the Apple goggles, if you're coming in through the Microsoft goggles, so they say we have no way to verify whether or not the person who was violating the terms of service was wearing an Oculus goggle. We can't do anything about what's happening inside that platform. So the degree to which anybody will do anything is based entirely on the platform and whether or not they're going to regulate the behavior. The EU does have something called the Digital Services Act. It's set to go into effect in 2024. They have a lot of different rules that they're setting up for big tech on how they're supposed to police illegal content. It is unclear at this point how it might be applied to scenarios like the ones I was just talking about, but there is language that suggests we might be able to apply it that way, but that's in the EU. The US has no such laws. So it'll be interesting to see as a use case what happens over there and whether or not they'll be able to police this kind of behavior. But so far, it's unknown. Terms of service violations, like I said, entirely at the discretion of the platforms. So, crimes in real life. In March 2022, a Utah-based 13-year-old female left her home to meet an adult male that she met in the Metaverse platform using her Oculus goggles. The minor female was hidden in the back of her abductor's semi-truck, taken over state lines before she was recovered by law enforcement 2 days after her disappearance. Basically, we had to find her because we saw her leave her house on the Ring doorbell camera and then had to do the things that we do to go find her. And this was because she met her abductor on her goggles. Also in 2022, a Utah-based 13-year-old male left his home to meet an adult male he met while playing the avatar-based game or proto-metaverse Roblox. The subject and minor engaged in text-based sexually explicit conversations and exchanged nude photographs, which is CSAM, right? Kids don't think of it that way. They think, oh, we're just exchanging these photos. That is the production and dissemination of child sexual abuse material. Kids don't think of it that way because it's a photo of themselves, but it is child sexual abuse material that they are producing and exchanging, disseminating with another person. They exchanged the nude photographs, and then until the minor's parents discovered the interactions that he was having with his abuser. His cell phone was confiscated. They informed the police. The police were doing all the things that they were supposed to do. He was interviewed by a child adolescent forensic interviewer, or a CAFI as we call them. They were doing all the things that they thought they were supposed to do. What happened, however, was that the family did not understand that the minor reestablished contact with the subject using his Oculus goggles because they did not understand what the goggles were capable of. They thought it was a video game. So they didn't know that it had a web browser. They didn't know that he could get to social media. They didn't know that he'd be able to contact him. So even after they had identified the abuse, he was able to use his goggles, reestablish contact, and they made plans to run away together. They made it all the way to Nebraska. He was sexually assaulted multiple times before they were discovered. And that's all because they did not understand what the Oculus was capable of. In 2021, an adult male successfully elicited sexually explicit photos from a female he knew to be a minor. He attempted to elicit sexually explicit photos from a Utah-based male that he knew to be underage, both of whom he met in the Oculus goggles. And I put this in here because this is an example of how even when you do not meet them in real life crimes are being committed because they can still get them to produce and disseminate CSAM, right? So they're still being exploited. And those pictures can end up everywhere, being reproduced over and over and over again on the internet. They think that they are just having a conversation with their friend on the internet. They think that those photos are going to stay between them and their friend, but they are going to end up potentially all over the world, and they can't get them back, right? Kids do not have the same perception of what a stranger is, right? We tell them, don't provide this kind of material to a stranger. This is a stranger from the internet. What a stranger is to them is not the same thing as what a stranger is to us. They become friends very quickly with somebody online because that's how they meet people now, right? They put on their headset and they play World of Warcraft with somebody in Japan and they're best friends. So they don't think of strangers the same way that we do. And 4 minutes after they've been talking with this guy, they're friends. The March 2022 kidnapping facilitated by the Quest was believed to be one of the very first of its kind in the nation. Crimes against children's tips, complaints, and cases involving VR headsets have gone up significantly since then, including enticement, CSAM creation, and sextortion. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. Sextortion is absolutely out of control right now. You'll definitely see from the FBI how much we're putting out information about that. But any crime or sextortion scheme that you see using Web 2 or the internet right now will be replicated in the metaverse or on Web 3. Absolutely. So mitigating the potential threat. Parents are the first line of defense. Prevention is the best way to mitigate this problem. Parental controls, screencasting, which means you can take what your kid is seeing on those goggles and you can actually cast it to a screen so that you can see what they are seeing. A lot of parents don't know that's possible, but it is. And then joint play. You can play the same game your kid is playing so that you can actually know what happens in those games and that you can be a part of it as well. Also, candid conversations with children about the dangers. I know parents don't necessarily like to talk about these topics with their kids, but if your kids are old enough to wear these goggles and go into these spaces, then they are old enough to have this conversation because this is what's waiting for them in there. And they need to know that this is a possibility. Additionally, educators, advocacy, and community groups can be an absolute blessing in amplifying this message. And then providing education to the youth, to parents, to anybody who participates in this process. And then policymakers. They may not be aware of the threat of child exploitation in the metaverse, and they may not understand that there are potential gaps in local, state, or federal law to address this threat. And that's going to be very important. For example, childlike sex dolls, which I'm sure many of you have heard about because there have been lots of legislatures around the country right now that are discussing this issue, but a lot of people had never heard of them. And so now there are lots of legislatures that are trying to figure out, oh, what are we going to do about this? Because there were not laws to address this. So we might go in and arrest somebody or identify somebody who had a childlike sex doll, and there was nothing that we could do about it. There's no law that says that they can't have it. So those are the kinds of things that are happening right now. So the things that we're going to talk about tonight, the developing technologies and the future of exploitation, these are the things we don't have time to talk about today, but we're going to talk about teledildonics, haptics, the darkverse, and the mixnet. These are all technologies that are either currently in existence, are developing right now. These are all ways that are going to be leveraged to further exploit children. And so we can answer any questions you have about that. But these new technologies, they almost all have great potential to do great things in the world, like we were talking about with the metaversities, for example. But like all technology, they come with potential dangers, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we have to know what they are. We have to be prepared to protect our families with that knowledge. And then sometimes it means we have to talk to advocates and policymakers and law enforcement, whoever it is, so that they are aware of it as well. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and I am happy to take any questions that you might have. And then, like I said, we'll talk a lot more about this tonight as well in the breakout session.